Right, the chrome trim for the top of the camera, that can be dropped in place. Make sure that this arm is back inside it. There's a single screw that holds this in place. Now I can tension up the film advance and then fit the cocking rack. So to tension up the film advance, first I press up on the lock lever and swing it to one side. Pull back my release lever, rotate clockwise the advance shaft by one full turn, drop my lock lever and release lever back in position, and that's tensioned up. Here, because I have the luxury of doing so, I've got a shortened base plate which I'm going to fit at this stage because it allows me to work on the camera and put the shutter back quite easily. So I'll just pop this in place. Two screws in to hold that in place, that's all I'll need. And at the top of the camera I can fit the cocking rack. I'll zoom you in a bit. Here's the cocking rack. I'm just putting some synthetic grease on particularly on the teeth. But on the underside of that rack and on that back face in particular. That drops in here and one tooth is engaged. We have our guide bush, if you like, that fits there. And our clamp down plate, which we wriggle over in position over the top of that rack, fits on there. Two screws on that clamp down plate. And where's its mate gone? Is there a second ago? There it is. Do those two screws up. We have our strap lug. And we have one special screw, countersunk head screw, plain shaft just up underneath the head, which supports that bush. I'll apply a little bit of molybdenum paste around the plain part of that shaft at the top of the screw, not down on the thread because I want it to stay where it's put. Run that screw in. Have a plain screw on the other side of that strap lug. Our cocking rack is firmly in position. At the top of the camera here we still have the strap lug and rewind shaft and bush to go back in. So I'll start with the rewind bush. I'll apply some synthetic grease to the inside of the rewind bush. Push the shaft up through it. That drops into place in the body. There are two countersunk head screws that hold that in place. Whoops. Magnetic screwdrivers only hold when you don't want them to. Here we go. Tighten those two screws up. And the strap lug fits on the end of the body here on the top plate. I've nipped those screws up tight. So that's the major parts of our straightforward mechanical stuff at the top of the camera. At the base of the camera, well, we know we have our film advance tensioned up. I've got my advance lever which I'm going to fit temporarily. So first I'm going to clean that since it's a bit grimy. I'm using some naphtha. That's good. And fit that to the advance shaft. This is held in by 3 long screws. Not quite picking up there. Let's come round a bit. That's better. I'll put 2 screws in place. If I hold down this lever, which is the release lever, put my finger on the top of the lock lever, I can swing the film advance repeatedly. The action is smooth. It's just as I'd expect it to be. There's sufficient tension on the rewind, on the advance lever, to return it to the park position smoothly without it being over tight. That's good. So our body is basically ready now to get near the stage of putting the meter back in it. So I'm checking everything now to make sure that everything is ideal. I'm watching in particular the mesh of the cocking rack here and the gear to make sure that they are closely meshed. On a very worn camera you may find that there's sufficient wear that there's a lot of clearance at this point, in which case the rack is likely to fail. What you can do is you can loosen the 2 screws holding the central bush in place and push the bush as far back towards the back of the camera as it will move, retighten those screws, and that will take up some of that play. Conversely, if you've got it shifted too far back to start off with, you may find that it's unusually tight on the cocking rack. The action should be smooth. In any state, this is in good condition. This is working nicely. So pretty much the next thing to do is to set up the meter. Before you can fit the meter on this camera, you have to put your shutter release shaft in place with its return spring and your film release button in place with its return spring. And at that stage everything starts to want to fall off as soon as you're looking the wrong way. So getting the meter in place on one of these cameras is entertaining. The cord on the meter has to be led round the correct pulleys on the correct side for everything to work correctly. It can be a mission. So that's my next task. Well, the time has come to think about getting the meter and everything back into this Retina IIIS. So the first step is to take the shutter release shaft. I'm putting a very thin wipe of molybdenum paste on there. Put its return spring in place. And then I'll drop that down into the body. That's good. That fits just in the body there. Now you'll notice that the shutter release shaft has a notch in this plate at the top which runs at the back of this upstand here. Let's put a little smear of molybdenum on there so that it runs smoothly. Next, I've got the film release button, which should pop on the shaft there. I'm just checking that that looks right and that I've got my springs round the right way, and I think I probably do not. So let's do this the correct way then. Shorter spring on the shutter release, longer spring on the film release button. I'll just run a smear of molybdenum paste through the centre of the film release button. Pop that spring over the post. Let's have a look at that. How does that look? Yeah, that looks a bit happier. Okay. I'll just check that I've got that absolutely right. That's correct. The shorter of the two screws goes on the shutter release shaft. The shorter of the two springs goes on the shutter release shaft. The longer of the two springs goes on the film release. Right, here I've got my exposure meter. This still has the cord attached to it, so I'm not going to show you this time how you thread that up from scratch. I'll stop for a second here. I want to do two tasks here before I fit the meter. The first is to put a spot of lacquer either side of this screw to lock it so it never comes loose accidentally. And the second is to put a tiny spot of grease on the top here so that dog is suitably lubricated. So I'll go and find some grease. I'll zoom you in a bit so you can see the action. Now it takes very little to stop a screw from backing up, from rattling loose. So what I've got is some nail varnish, nice cheap stuff, bright red for easy recognition. Take a tiny dot on the end of a toothpick and I'll just pop it into that hole in the top of the screw head there, both sides. That's all that's required. You don't need to smother that screw with lacquer. It takes very little. All we're trying to achieve is to make sure that that doesn't rattle loose by itself. Not that they're particularly prone to. While I've got this, before I fit the meter in place, I'll just take a tiny smear of synthetic grease and I'll put it just there, right in the apex between the rack and the gear, and that will just transfer around. That's fine. And so to the exposure meter. The exposure meter in this case has got a little tab on the back edge, and that hooks in underneath the strap lug at the end. I'll zoom you out because you're getting a bit cramped here. I'll see if I can do this back to front so you can get a front on view. The cord is wrapped 2 turns effectively around that drum at the top, and it's locked in at the back, and I'll show you that later. So you can see the cord is here. At the bottom, this is a double pulley. The cord running from this side of the drum goes to the bottom. The cord from this side of the drum goes to the top. So that's the 2 positions at this pulley here. For this pulley, this one here, and I'm checking I've got this right, from the back to the front. So the bottom position goes to the front position here, the one facing you. The one from the top goes to the rear position. I'm checking that this is right. That looks all correct. So our cord comes round the drum this way to the top position here, and then it goes to the back pulley here, the one closest to the centre line of the camera. I'll hold that in position with my finger. I need to pull those cords down through the hole in the body, and for this purpose I've got a piece of wire. And that was just a twist tie for doing up sandwich bags or whatever, and it's just had the plastic stripped off it, and the end hooked over on the thin wire. So I can poke it up through the body, and then with a bit of luck I can hook it round my cord. That's one of them. Pull it down through the hole in the body. Do the same again. That's the other one. Now I'm keeping some tension on this so that I don't get my cord, the cord doesn't slip. It stays on the pulley where it was left. Alright, so my cord positions are correct here. Right to this point. Now I need to temporarily fix them there so that I can get them onto the drum at the bottom. And one relatively easy way to achieve this is to use a couple of washers and a screw, and we'll use this to clamp that cord in position. So first we need to get our screw started in this post. That's all that's wanted. And then you just need to decide for yourself whether the cord from the front position should go to this side of the screw or whether it should go to that side of the screw. It's a convention that you only need for your own purposes. It doesn't matter which one you choose. So I'll hook the cord from the back pulley over to the back, to the end of the camera, and the other one I'll pull in here. So I've got the cord going either side of the screw between the washers, and I'll just do that up very lightly. Alright, so that's holding our cord in place, so it's all completely staying in place around the top of the camera right down to this point here. And if I've left the meter in the correct position, ASA 10, and it's about the right physical position, I should be fine from this point in. There are two arrangements for this pulley at the bottom of the camera. This one here, you can see, if I loosen the screw, it can be slid up and down in the body to tension the cord. The more common arrangement, because this arrangement didn't last very long, is to have an arm here, a swinging arm with a spring, so that the tension on the cord is maintained at a fixed tension basically by the spring that acts on that arm. In this case I've just got to pull this pulley downwards until I'm satisfied the correct tension is present, and then do the screw up to lock it in place. In practice, when I opened this camera up, this bracket was already in the lowest tension position, but there seemed to be more than sufficient tension on that cord, so most likely that's going to be exactly the same putting it back together. So our next task is to take our cable drum for the bottom of the camera and wind our cable onto it correctly and drop it over its post. Make sure that the cable is connected around the pulleys correctly, of course. Make sure our tension is okay, and then lock this adjustment screw. Okay, continuing on with this, getting this meter connected back up. And what I'm looking for, oh, no wonder I'm not seeing it, it's already sitting in place. Okay. Alright, here's our lower cable drum. Now I'm just going to put a smear of synthetic grease in the centre of that, so that it'll run nice and smoothly on the post. I'm looking at the position of my cords up here to remind myself which one went on that side of the screw, which one went on this side of the screw. And the one at the front facing me is on towards the centre line of the camera. That's good to know. Now I've got to get these cables wrapped up onto this drum and get the drum over that post, which is always entertaining. So how are these going to be positioned? Well, that one's going to be at the back pulley, this one's going to be at the front pulley. And looking at my drawing, it reminds me that the one on the front pulley goes to the bottom of the drum, the one at the back pulley goes to the top of the drum. Like that. So I'm double checking to make sure I haven't messed up. If you mess up, if you manage to swap the cord to the wrong pulley at any stage in this linkage, effectively what will happen is that when you rotate the drum at the bottom of the camera, the meter will be rotating in the wrong direction. And if you get things exactly right, you can set it up so the meter is accurate at exactly one spot. But as soon as you move your settings in a different direction, it gets further and further away from correct because you're going the wrong way. And worse, you will reach the end of the cord travel at the meter end before you reach the end of the travel of the mechanism at the bottom of the camera, and so the cord then comes to a fixed stop, and when it's forced further, the cord would break. Of course, we haven't made that mistake, so I don't need to worry about it. So, the front cord goes into the drum and it goes into the bottom, and I know that it runs roughly 3/4 of a turn here. It will sit like that. The back cord starts in the opposite position on the drum. The cord has got a knot in the end, so it goes into a slot in the drum. And if this appears a bit awkward to do, I can tell you that in practice it's much worse than that. And I've managed to get my cords swapped over there where they're pulling over that pulley. Now let's see what I've got. So the cord at the front is on the front pulley. The front pulley goes to the bottom of that drum. That's correct. And the opposite must be the case. So now I'm going to remove my screw here. And those washers, which don't need to be there anymore. And my cord should be correctly coupled up. Now, almost inevitably at this stage, we've got cord running over each other on the drum down here, so I'm just tidying up the position of those cords so that the cord coming in at the top of this drum is at the back. The cord coming in at the bottom of the drum is at the front, and that there's minimal overlap so that the cords run smoothly. Actually, that looks pretty good to me. And just make sure that that cord is pressed to the end of its slot. That looks okay. So my cord's connected correctly. Before I started this, I made sure that the ASA was set to 10 because that was the position at which I'd removed everything. That's the standard position for placing everything back. Now I can position the drum here, and I want to position that so that the slot in the front of this drum, I think it's, what do they say, 11 o'clock? I'm just checking my notes here. They do make a note of it somewhere, but I can't immediately see it. So the slot in this drum is pointing to roughly the 11 o'clock position. And the cord at the front here comes down that pulley, it goes around the drum and back to this point where it fixes to the drum. That's only as far as it goes. At that point everything should be correct. The yellow pointer on the needle should be back at this corner. So my meter there is effectively correctly positioned. And that means that at this stage the body is ready to have the shutter assembly put back in it.